Blake in Montana, welcome to the Diesel Podcast. I'm excited to chat with you guys today about individually what you guys do at Suncoast, but then also Suncoast in general. The guys are, gosh, a company I've known about forever. You guys have been around diesel since the very beginning, really specializing in diesel transmissions and gas transmissions. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys today, learning about you, Suncoast, and then jumping into the big thing that's out there are the 10 speeds that kind of taking the market by storm. I know people are asking questions about development and that kind of stuff. So it'll be a great time chatting with you guys.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it.
Blake, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about what you do at Suncoast and kind of your journey into working there, being involved in the diesel industry, and being on the transmission side.
Yeah, I think being involved in the diesel industry was a little bit of an accident. I've been here 10 years. I'm the president of sales and marketing, so responsible for generating revenue and looking at trends within the industry. Before here, I was a tuner and a software guy at a small gas shop, and we did some transmission work as well. It was called PATC. That company has since closed. I'd worked there in a transition for a few years after working for GM for quite a few years. Suncoast came about. I had actually talked to them a couple of years prior about coming down here and coming to work, and like everything else, we get comfortable in our daily life. And I had some kids in high school, and I was coaching football, and I had a good life. And moving wasn't something that was in the plans, but the company I worked for got purchased in 2015, and just come down here for a couple of weeks was the pitch to Destin, Florida, and see if you like it, if you even want to live here, right? And that's an evil thing to do because before we even talk money, the wife and kids are already in love with the place. So it's been a long journey here, 10 years, and we've seen people like Montana grow from when Dallas left, and I watched Montana move into his apartment and take his room to working at Hardway to where he's at today. So we've watched a lot of people grow up in the industry. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, Montana, tell me a bit about yourself. I've never met you in person. We've talked on the phone and on social media a little bit, but I've known about you for a really long time in the diesel space. But how'd you get started in it?
We'll do a short side of that story. I was 20 years old when I moved up here, and Ryan Milliken had gave me an opportunity to come and work at Hardway Performance as a sales rep. And that quickly spiraled into, learning about website, doing some tech side, doing a little bit of tuning side within that. Enter Emerald Coast Dragway. Ryan, myself, along with some other people, partnered up and took over that lease. We ran that together. And I made my exit from Hardway about 8 years ago and came over here to Suncoast. Actually, Blake, he's been a great mentor, but also a huge pain in the butt. He would always pull me to the side. I'd come over to Suncoast to pick up parts, and he'd pull me to the side and have random talks about stuff. Hey, what do you think about this? What would you do on this truck? And he was poking and prodding. He had his eyes set on me for a little while. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I came over here and started off in teardown. I was really good at tearing transmissions up, knowing how they function correctly, knowing what they needed. That's a different story. So going through teardown, doing my year stint in teardown led me to understand how it's supposed to work, and that led to a keen eye for what deficiencies they had and how we can improve upon that. And this all the way back then had to do with 48 REs and 68s. We really hadn't touched the gas market. 10 speeds were not even thought of back then when this happened. But that landed me in a full-time position doing research and development. Once again, my inept ability to tear stuff up, but also figure out how to keep it from tearing up. That was a key role with some of our 10-speed stuff.
Yeah, what Montana, what he's not saying is his process here in teardown, that was just the beginning. From the beginning, we knew that he knew some stuff with software. And if you look at the proliferation from the 4-speed to the 6-speed to the 8-speed to now the 10-speed, the majority of it is software controlled. And we knew that Montana could build a 48. There for a while, when he would tear one up, Ernie would make him come in and build it himself. We had gotten tired of doing that for him, and he did a good job of tearing him up. But, looking at developing a young kid, part of the reason to be in teardown is he needed to see all the failures. He needed to see what he was taking apart. there need to be some fundamental mechanical intuition that he had. So when he saw something, he could see patterns. And, for him to go from there, he went to build, then he ran our production facility. And then we had him go from our production facility, overseeing production, to the install bay and to R&D. And then he ran our race program for a little while. And now he's procuring and doing dealer development and whatnot. So the process for Montana has been a long 8-year one, but we put him in different positions strategically, knowing that it would come full circle one day. And I think that's what we're finally at now. We've got somebody who can look at something, diagnose it. The stuff we did with the software on the 10-speed stuff, it was, and for him to learn the GM stuff was pretty easy as well. So really proud of where he's been. So don't let him tell you that it was just ended up there, but he's done a good job for us. We're proud of him.
Hey, Diesel fans, wanted to let you guys know that our friends over at Kershaw Knives have a 40% off MSRP code for you. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code TDP2540, you get your 40% off MSRP. It's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear. If you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house, they've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, opening mechanisms, handle designs, and their whole lineup is designed to meet any budget that you might have. So we really appreciate them offering that discount code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. So if you're in the market, head on over to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code TDP2540, and get 40% off MSRP. This is really, really interesting to me because of all the parts of the diesel aftermarket that have always interested me the most, they're transmissions. And I can't quite pinpoint it, what it is about them. I don't know if it's because it brings the truck together with all the fancy, shiny things we put on with turbos and injection pumps and injectors and tuning and all that sort of stuff. If you have a transmission that does not work and does not hold the power, it'll ruin the whole build.
Yeah.
If it's an application where it is high performance, it is a track use truck, well, that's going to make or break your day. So I see just how involved it is in different aspects of it. So I want to ask you guys a general question for both of you. What about transmissions and that side of the industry pulled you guys in and made you really passionate? What interested you about that particular side so much?
I didn't have a pull. I wasn't passionate about it. It was something that was developed through attrition. Like you said, I'm a huge gas LS guy, and we raced a lot of LSs and had a lot of 4Ls, 4L60s and 4L80s, and then 6L80s. Because you put something together and because it makes a lot of power and because it fails, I think what you see is, in a lot of the great transmission shops that we deal with now are guys who were engine shops, and because they couldn't rely on a local builder or couldn't rely on somebody that they knew, then we were left sitting on the sideline. And so many times the problem in this industry with transmissions, and this is where Montana was a little bit different, was we go and take a new guy in a typical transmission shop and you put him on a teardown bench and he tears down the same unit all day. Well, if you took this phone apart, say 200 times, eventually you'd know how to put it back together, right?
Yeah.
If I asked you, what if I put a 1 ohm resistor on that circuit board right there, would you know what would happen? So, these guys that start at teardown, they allow them to start building. Well, they build and they don't have any issues, but they have no fundamental theory or knowledge of hydraulic theory. If you tell them, if I take that ring land and I make it 30 thousandths larger, what happens to the reaction area? Does it increase or decrease the pressure? What happens to the shuttle time of that valve? And so because of that, I think that there's a huge deficiency, and typically tuners or shops that do a lot of motor work tend to have a higher level of thinking individual. The other downfall that you see is most transmission shops, if I was going to send you to school, I have to pay your salary. You have to go somewhere for a week. I have to pay for your room and board. And that could be $4,000 or $5,000 of expenses that you incur for like our research lab or something like that. If I'm a small transmission shop, can I afford to lose that production for a week? Can I afford to send that guy? Because those people, when you call, what's the first question is how much?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a deficiency in it. And I know that's what drew me into looking or trying to find solutions within the industry, and drew me to it. I'm not sure Montana was probably just, he had a lot of cool motors that couldn't go nowhere.
Yeah, for me, it became more of a necessity than anything, really. Being at Hardway, very, very well focused and oriented towards turbos and fuel injectors and engines, hard parts, which led to me having way too much of a motor for the transmission I currently had. It's no default on Suncoast's part. I just flat out had too much power, too much motor, and I've got a size 15 foot as well. That doesn't help us out. So I found myself realizing I've really not addressed the transmission. And I think as a whole, most people, they spend a lot of money on their fuel system, their motors, their suspension. Transmission's a last thought of, and it's one of the most important parts of that vehicle. And I'm no different. Too many times I was over here at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. The day before I was supposed to be at an ODSS event, and I'm in the back with Ernie and going through and, here's what you messed up. Here's what tore up. Trying to figure out what part combination works. I like puzzles as well. And to me, the transmission, it's a giant puzzle. Once you understand how things fit together, then you can start modifying that puzzle. And I'll tell you this now, too many late nights over here with Ernie, I thought to myself, man, this guy's really ornery. I want to make sure I fix this thing correctly so I don't have to bother him anymore. But now he's one of my other great mentors here as well. But yeah, for me, it was out of necessity. And then also just my brain, the way it works, I like figuring things out. I like trying new stuff, whether it works or not. At least I was there. I tried it. I did it. And I have the data from it.
I wanted to talk about the evolution of what a diesel truck enthusiast needs today versus the kind of where it started, how we got to this point. So when I think back 10 or 15 years, and this wouldn't necessarily be for a daily driven truck, probably something with a tune, maybe turbo fuel system, especially on the Dodge trucks, you'd run into an issue where the 68 RFE, say, wasn't going to hold that power. And there were all these solutions for built 48 REs and 47 REs and some of this older technology. And then I think to how things are today, and we have these trucks that come from the factory with plenty of power, plenty of torque. We've gone to 8 speeds, we've gone to 10 speeds. What has it been like from Suncoast perspective, evolving from like that early, say that 47 RH or the 47, 48 RE with very minimal electronic inputs to now, like you mentioned, Blake, there's tons of software that's involved in shift timing, line pressure, all these different things. What's it been like evolving with the trucks that are coming out now?
You want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Hardest part to overcome, we'll address 68s. Forget everything you learn about 48s, 68s. The valve body houses 3 valves. The pump is actually what houses all the valves within that. So taking a 48 and being able to hydraulically fix a lot of the deficiencies via line pressure, shift solenoids, things of that nature, we lost that ability when we came into the Lapellier Ravenel. So that, for those of you at home, the Lapellier Ravenel is a clutch-to-clutch transmission, whereas a 48, Turbo 400, things of that nature was a clutch-to-band transmission. These transmissions function on an overlap process. One clutch comes on as another clutch is coming off. All of that timing, it's really done by the computer. It's done within the solenoid pack. There's very little that we can hydraulically modify in terms of that. For us, I think a big part of this for us was also understanding just the function of it. How does it work? What is the tuning responsible for? And we really, until you understand that, you cannot fix the unit. Until you understand how it operates. I mean, to this day, we've got a brand new, 2-year-old Hipland dyno. I'm still learning stuff as far as solenoid operation and whatnot when it comes to that dyno. That was the biggest learning curve for that generation of guys, going from the 48, going to the new Lapellier Ravenel gear sets. Allison's, all those are Lapellier Ravenel. Understanding how they work, understanding the proper way to modify them was a huge turning point for us in the industry. And like you said, yeah, going all the way back to 07.5, when the 68 came alive, the trucks were 320, 340 horse rated. Now you got to go down to the dealership, you got a 400 horse factory truck. The transmission's virtually unchanged from 2007.5 all the way up until 18. Transmission is virtually the same internal. So what have they done differently? You start looking at some of the calibrations. The software also evolved and gave us more adjustment points to handle the increased power. You see where your shift timing maps, you have a lot more control over those things. For us, figuring out the software, how it worked, was really step one before we could do too much to that unit. Sure, you can add your clutches, you can go and change your valving, and we can go and address the converter side, but that's the end result. What is controlling that? What do we need to do? And that comes down to valve body and how we can manipulate what the solenoids are doing. We're not changing the solenoids directly, but how does that solenoid transfer fluid to the clutch pack? We can control that now.
And Patrick, I think a lot of it boils down to familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember when, and I'm older, 48, I can remember when 700 R4s came out, everybody wanted to put a turbo 350 in. And then when 4L60s came out, nobody understood those and they wanted to put a 700 R4 in. And then when 4L or 6L80s came out, nobody could understand those, so they wanted to swap to a 4L80. And when 68s came out, everybody wanted to do what? They wanted to go back and swap to a 48. And when 5Rs came out, everybody wanted to put a 4R in. And it's because it's what they were familiar with, it's what they learned. At the end of the day, the LaPellier Ravenel gear set that he's talking about, people are doing so many things wrong, specifically with like the 68, that it's bound to fail. And the reason I say that is there's a host of things, and we can get into that if you want to, but you had asked a question about the evolution. I think that the software guidelines and the software controls are a lot more precise, and we know they're more precise. We have a lot more latitude in software. For instance, on the 10-speed, when we had our Rouse truck, we were doing some R&D on a valve, and I was trying to prove that our converter would lock up quicker. We had more friction, we had more friction coefficient, and we had a larger surface area, so therefore we should lock up quicker. And what I found is no matter what I did mechanically to the valve, the computer would compensate and it would lock up in the same amount of time. Once we got around that with some programming that we had figured out, then it was okay, well, now we have more latitude with our electronic controls than we do with our hydraulic controls. And regardless, the big thing is, the higher line pressure will, now you shift quicker. But if my desired shift time is half a second and I'm shifting in 3/10 of a second, the next time I go to that torque cell function, all I'm going to do is drop pressure until I get to a half a second. I'm always trying to ascertain or achieve whatever it is that I'm looking for. To see the evolution of, with the 10R cars, we're running 7 seconds on 10 speeds in a car. They're running 8 seconds in half-ton pickups. What we see with the failures are pretty much the same across the board. I think for us, the evolution or watching that process has been a huge learning curve. And I think the industry still has a lot of learning to do, as what you see now happening with 68s.
Yeah.
Still to this day.
I think you said it much better than I did, Blake, but yeah, I remember the time when if you wanted a transmission to hold power, you take your 6.7 and you'd buy a 48RE and put a controller, standalone controller on it. And while that was fantastic, I did it. I loved it. But there was this problem looming out there that if I wanted to sell that truck,
yeah,
it's a huge issue unless you find a specific buyer. And then you think of the money that you invested into it. And so I think, like, as a truck owner, what I find with people who need transmissions, I'd say, and I'm sure you guys hear all the stories all the time. It's either they don't plan for it and the transmission fails and they're in a hurry, they need to get something to get back, up and running, or it's somebody who's thought about a build for months or maybe years and they've kind of planned it ahead. And I think those are probably a little bit more rare. It's usually the guy who just needs one, right away. And then all of a sudden you're inundated with information from social media, from online, YouTube, different places, maybe even podcasts, and you don't know where to start. You don't know where to look to get a transmission. And I could Google transmission shops around me and probably find maybe 10 or 15. I'm not going to know the specialty that each one of them has or their capability. I think it's really important, like what you mentioned, Montana, with the 68 RFE and understanding the electronic side and some of these other components. What you guys do at Suncoast from an R&D standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, I can think back to drums you guys are making 10 plus years ago, which were the first on the market, which was really huge for that transmission. Talk to me a bit about that side, the manufacturing, the R&D, when a transmission comes in. what you guys do to learn about those weak points and then put all those decades of information and experience together to make a solution, whether it's a full transmission, rebuild kit, components, things that people might need.
Yeah, I think initially, Patrick, you have to have a baseline. And I'll kind of go through our process that I was very involved in on the 10 speeds. And starting in 2018, we bought 10-speed vehicles. And, the first thing we do when those come in is we log them. And we're looking for converter lockup, we're looking for shutter, we're looking for what's average weighted shift times, how does this shift logic work? And then we pull the file and we look at the back end and try to understand the logic. And then we start playing. And hey, if I manipulate this solenoid or if I manipulate this driver, what happens? That process, before you ever do anything as far as aftermarket performance, is critical, because if you don't have a baseline for understanding the logic, you don't understand how what you're doing is going to affect it. And so that's where I think that most of the companies that are doing things are having an issue. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the 68 RFE, thermal bypasses are pretty big, right?
Yeah.
Everybody runs one. Everybody talks about it. You've heard about it, right?
Yep.
Well, what are your thoughts on that, Patrick, if you don't mind me asking?
I get a little torn two ways. One is, I think Ram spent all this time and probably millions of dollars to engineer this transmission to operate a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And they're warranting it for X amount of years, so they don't want it to fail and have to eat a transmission. So that's kind of in the back of my mind. So when I see like the marketing or the discussions of them, I think to myself, do they know more than Ram knew when they designed this transmission? What are some cause and effect? I actually had a recent podcast with an engine builder. He said there's nothing you can do to your truck that doesn't cause something else in the system to behave differently. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I understand the temperature aspect to it, but my first thought is, well, what am I changing, and does it have a negative effect?
Yeah. So let me run you through some scenarios. Patrick, if I was to put you in a pool of oil and I had it set at 100 degrees, I could measure the lactate in your blood after you swim across the pool and measure the amount of physical exertion you had, right?
Yeah.
And we could say this is the amount of physical exertion that you had on this lap. If I brought you back the next week and did the same thing, but I had the oil 50 degrees cooler, what do you think your exertion would be like? Do you think it'd be greater?
I think it'd be, well,
less. If the oil was 50 degrees cooler?
Well, if it's cooler, I'd probably exert myself more.
Yeah.
Because it's thicker.
Correct.
Or has more resistance to it.
Yeah, we have a thicker oil that has a higher parasitic load on the pump. But here's where it gets interesting. The grooves in the clutch, what are the grooves for? Well, the grooves are there for a couple of reasons. One is to channel oil to cool off. Do you think that oil at 50 degrees cooler travels slower or faster across that clutch?
Slower.
Okay. So now we put a higher parasitic load on the pump, and now we have less gallons per minute going across the face of the clutch. That sounds intelligent, but it's cooler. So then when we clamp that clutch and we compress it, what do we have to evacuate? We have to evacuate the fluid, because you can't compress the fluid, can we? We know that. That's a hydraulic principle. So when we can't compress the fluid has to evacuate. Do you think cooler fluid evacuates slower or faster?
Slower.
Okay. So now we've increased our shift times. We've now decreased the gallons per minute going across the clutch. We have a higher parasitic load on our pump. And then there's this last thing or the two last things that are really cool. One is called the absorption rate. So that engineer that designed that paper would talk to another engineer and was given a form, a sheet by the manufacturer, and said, this is the temperature for which we're going to operate it, because we know that this is the temperature for which we have the least amount of metal degradation, the least amount of wear, and we know that this is going to be mostly fuel efficient here. Well, so that paper engineer designs this paper to be at peak absorption rate at that temperature. So now that the absorption rate changed, what do you think that does to the paper? Well, we have If we have different absorption, we have different friction coefficient, right? So now we've changed the friction coefficient of the paper. The last thing that we can talk about, there's another thing called modulus of elasticity. Modulus of elasticity, if you can think of a tire tread, how a tire tread moves back and forth. Well, those segments on the clutch move as well. Well, if I change the temperature of the oil and the absorption rate, I'm also changing the modulus of elasticity. So in essence, I'm changing the way the clutch clamps. Then to top it off, now I have colder fluid, higher parasitic load on the pump, less gallons per minute across the clutch. It's going to take longer to evacuate. Now I've changed the absorption rate of the fluid. Then I've changed the modulus of elasticity. What else could I do? Oh, I know what I could do. I could delete torque management and not let it defuel between shifts. So now this clutch that the engineer said is going to see 100 pounds of torque on shift, we'll see 900 foot-pounds of torque. And it'd be just like me speed shifting a manual transmission. What would happen to that clutch on that? It'd degrade pretty quick, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And then we wonder, like, who thinks of this? Who thought that through? Because if you talk to the engineers that design the paper and design the clutch, which we have, they don't recommend a thermal bypass. They'll tell you everything that I just told you.
And somebody may ask, well, how much does that really affect it? I had the privilege of spending a week with BorgWarner engineers, and BorgWarner is a very large OE supplier, specifically talking
Largest
about
OE
68s.
supplier in the world,
Yeah, they are, but 68s, they supply all the factory clutches for 68s, and some of the clutches for 10 speeds. And the particular paper that we were talking about, whenever we were doing a static torque holding capacity, so clutch is already applied, how much torque does it take to break it away? If you had oil that was at 100 degrees versus oil, and this is a 10-speed, oil that was at 180, how much of a difference would you think you'd see?
They could tell by the test.
They told
the
me
oil was
exact.
Yeah.
And it was substantial. The torque holding of that clutch increased at 180 degrees, almost 50% over what it was at 100 degrees. It makes that much of a difference. Fluid temp does, depending on the clutch material that we have. So the guys at home that think, well, maybe this isn't a big deal.
The other thing, we talked about deleting torque management or defueling. Once a clutch is engaged, the holding capacity is exponentially increased. So when I say that, allow the clutch to engage and then pour on all the power if you're trying to get it to live. But trying to get that clutch to get hit in the face, I'm a 350-pound guy. If I went and sat in a plastic chair and it broke, I wouldn't be upset with Walmart. I'd say I need a big chair. And so when we take the smallest clutch, the thinnest clutch, and then we start manipulating things like temperature and whatnot, and then we hit it with all the power, we wonder why we have an early degradation cycle to the clutch. But the thing that doesn't make sense, if someone had a manual transmission and they went around speed shifting it from first to second, didn't lift off the gas, they wouldn't call Valera or South Bend and say, why did this clutch wear out so quickly? They would know. Well, some people might call, but for the most part, they would understand why the degradation rate was so high. And we're seeing the same thing happening with 10 speeds now. We're having people calling us trying to buy, cooler bypasses or wanting to delete them from, and you're just going, what are you thinking? What's going on?
Hey, Diesel fans, I wanted to chat with you about diesel fuel. It's something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, and specifically ways that it can lead to a lot of costly repairs. And the main reason that we have these issues is a lack of lubricity. Our friends over at Hot Shot Secrets have developed a formula that boosts performance and then addresses this issue. So whether you have an old truck, new one, something anywhere in between, we all face this issue. Hot Shots EDT is a 6-in-1 formula. It cleans injectors, boosts cetane, and it has 4 times the lubricity as their leading competitor. So it's a great way to be able to stay ahead of the maintenance curve, avoid those costly repairs, and the best part is it does the work for you. So all you do is add it to your regular fuel up schedule, and it's doing all the heavy lifting. So you don't have to worry about some of those issues that just come with diesel fuel anytime we buy it from the pump. If you go to hotshotsecret.com, use code DieselPod20. It'll get you 20% off your order. We really appreciate the team and our friends over at Hot Shot Secret offering this discount code just for you guys. So if you're in the market, head on over to their website, use code DieselPod20 and get 20% off your order. common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increase power, increase torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. I think this is huge, and it's huge for a bunch of reasons. It's a perfect example to talk about, because I love the perspective of a truck owner and enthusiast to the professionals that are in their respective industries and the R&D and the technical information in building something and what they know. So if I'm a truck owner and I think, well, my temperatures are getting to 210, 215, 220, I need to lower them. Like I know that higher temperatures are bad, right? So I go and I buy this thermal bypass, and I think I'm doing a good job. I think I am helping my transmission to avoid, say, having to call you guys and say, hey, I need a built transmission. When can I get it?
Right.
But what I'm really doing, what you just told me, is I'm affecting the integrity of the clutch packs and really the health of the transmission. And I think that happens a lot in the aftermarket. And I think just to say it bluntly, it's a way to sell something to a consumer to get their money, to make them feel like they're doing something, so that maybe you can capture the sale later on because you got their email and their phone number and you can sell it to them later. And I don't like to see that, because I wouldn't want that done to me. I wouldn't want to be forced into having to buy a transmission because I made a bad decision.
Now, there's another side. I'm going to play devil's advocate here to my own point. I don't think the majority of people are doing it because they want to sell. I think there is that. I think the majority of people are doing it because the consumers didn't flush the cooler correctly. And when you don't flush that cooler correctly and you don't do a hot flush to heat it up to allow the porosity of the mantle to expand, what you get is that trash from the degradation instantly circulates through the cooler, and it's very easy to clog that thermal bypass up. So I think a lot of people have seen failures after they did a replacement. They go to the thermal bypass, there's a bunch of metal in the thermal bypass. Oh, we lost cooler flow. That's what happened. At the end of the day, if you do a hot flush and you're measuring, there's a tool called a SonoFlow tool. And we ask for what's the gallons per minute going across the cooler. If I'm, 7.5 or 9.5 gallons per minute, then I know I'm good. But if I've got 3.5 gallons per minute going across this cooler, then I know I still have some restriction, and the cooler should probably be replaced. But how many people SonoFlow? And if you call 10 transmission shops and ask them how they SonoFlow their coolers after they do a transmission service, and see how many know what you're even talking about. And these are engineering grade tools that you have at your disposal, or any shop should have. But I think the other side is that a lot of people see that and they have warranty issues, and that's something that internally that we fought. Should we sell them? Mm-hmm. And I'm not an advocate, and I'm really starch no, but when you talk to the warranty people, they're like, hey, this thing lost cooler flow. And you can see where you have, low lube to the center support or something like that. You know what it is. So it's kind of I think a catch-22 in the industry. Now, what's the solution? The solution is to fix it the way the OE would have you fix it, which is to flush the cooler until you get the proper cooler flow, or replace the cooler if you have that much damage.
And to that point too, most aftermarket cooler brands, they have a built-in thermostat within their cooler itself. So you can, in that case, you can delete the factory one and still maintain what we're talking about, letting the trans come up to operating temp.
Yeah. It makes a difference especially on the new 10 speeds on how they shift as well.
We learned that on the track. Yeah.
And if we're talking about, the track, the thing that the track helps us with in racing is the same thing that we had an issue with on the 10R80 at 1500 horsepower is the same thing that you see at 80,000 miles on a 10L1000. It's just at 1500 horsepower on a 10R80, it's an accelerated rate. But you're going to find the weak spots. You're going to find what's going to shield, what the break points are. And we've done a lot of that with the 10 speed and with the 6 speed. But the 68s are, man, they're damned. And then you take the tuning on top of it. The first thing people want to do is, and it feels better. The shifts feel better when you delete defueling, right? Who wants a defueled truck? Nobody wants defuel, defuel. But I mean, that's what it's there for, is to save the life of that clutch to clutch unit. On a 48, you had a band that went around a drum, and that was hydraulic over mechanical action. Now we're clutch to clutch. We can't put a bigger servo. I can't put a bigger band lever. I can't do any of that. What you got to do is you got to lean up on the defueling between shifts. Let her breathe, let her make the shift, and then give her the power once she's clamped.
Well, that was the other part of that. In addition to the cooler bypass, was tuning and defueling and what tuners are able to do with that. And I know there's some great ones out there that understand how transmissions work, and I'm sure work with you guys to know exactly what you want to see with it. But then it's also kind of the Wild West a bit as well. And you think of, no matter how great of a transmission you build, depending what's adjusted in transmission, shift strategy, line pressure, things like that, it could be a recipe for disaster. And I'm not sure if that person who's never gone down the performance route with their diesel truck or had to, isn't immersed in the content and the education, knows to ask those sort of questions or understand the relationship between, wow, this shift's a lot firmer, it feels better. Well, does that translate into premature clutch wear, or when are they locking the converter? Is that shock loading the input shaft? What else is going on here?
Yeah, that's a really good point. For the most part, I would say on your late model 10-speed stuff, if you aren't racing, other than shift scheduling and the silly skip shift, there's nothing that really needs to be done. Now, it will have you in 10th gear at 40 miles an hour and lock up, lugging you along, right? And that's for cafe laws and for fuel economy. But as far as you needing to do anything in a calibration, they're pretty jam up. And I would say even the 10R80 is up until about 700 or 800 horsepower.
Yeah, even going back to the route structure we keep talking about, that shift file to this day, we modified 2 different maps, and that was moving lockup out a little bit. Yeah, there's not much to do, especially if you retain that torque management. They drive beautiful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people try to do too much is the problem. For the most part, we've gotten to a system here with anything that's 6, 8, or 10 speed, unless you're racing, which the majority, if we do the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, the majority of our consumers are function. And so, you talk about the 2 F's, is it function or is it fun? Now, fun gives us the branding, and that's what people know us for, but the majority of our consumers are function consumers. They necessarily don't need a diesel. They have one because they can, and you ask a lot of them, well, why do you have that? What did you do this for? Because I can. Well, I tow a duck blind. How much does your duck blind weigh? 2,500 pounds. You needed a dually for that. I can tell. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You do it because you can. And that's good too. Those are the people that we like.
I definitely want to spend some time on the 10 speeds kind of in general, get your guys' perception of them with the Ford Power Stroke and the GM Duramax. But I wanted to ask you more of a general question about when somebody is shopping for a transmission or looking into having one rebuilt, either one. What would you suggest are questions that people should ask? It might be specific if there's specific transmission models that you want to name, but what are some good things to ask a builder, or when you're searching online for a built transmission that maybe we don't think about normally? Is it warranty? Is it parts that are in there? Is it what should I ask?
You're asking if I'm a consumer
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
looking to purchase one.
Yep.
Yeah, I would just ask, are you deviating from the standard build? Do I need any specific tuning? Are there expanded capacity clutch packs? What makes this different versus a factory one? And obviously, I would probably check into what the warranty process is. Is this something I have to send in? How do I get reimbursed for labor? If you're looking and you're concerned and you think that you're potentially going to have an issue, can't think of anything else. Can you? We have a host that we ask.
I was going to say, on the flip side, it's more of a question: what should your transmission shop be asking you?
Yeah,
and that is one of the most important things. I want to know first and foremost what the truck is. Is it 2500? If it's a Dodge, a 2500 is going to have 342 gear set. What size tires do you have? What is the main usage of this? And obviously, hey, has this thing been modified?
Are you towing? Are you towing at altitude? Do we need to worry about you snuffing the Charger because you have an S480 with a non-divided AR and you go to Colorado once a year and we don't want to snuff the Charger up there? Those are the things and the main one is it for function or is it for fun? If they aren't asking what your needs are, and the industry that we're in is a boutique business. And the part that I say, just the transmission industry itself and torque converters. The manufacturing industry is kind of a boutique business for the transmission industry. There's only a few of us that manufacture. When you get into the performance transmission, it's very boutique. And a lot of times those customers will be better researched than you if they truly are. What is your passion besides the diesel podcast? Do you golf? Do you hunt?
Oh, I love watches, sports, a ton of different things.
So, if you go in to buy a watch, regardless of what it is, you're probably going to be better versed at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Or no more than the person behind the counter. And I'm sure you probably walked into a place and left and felt disappointed because you felt like you were better versed than what they were, right?
Yeah, it makes it tough.
And that's something that a lot of educated consumers. And so if you walk away not feeling good about the conversation, did they ask what your needs were? Did they try to meet your needs? Did they give you affirmation of your needs? Did they repeat those needs back to you? So let me get this straight, John. You're towing 30,000 pounds 2 times a month, typically flat. Is that correct? You got 35s. You didn't put gears in it. Is that correct? Okay. And you don't plan on doing anything. If you aren't getting some of that, then they probably aren't listening to you and they probably aren't looking to build you something. When people call them, and we talk to the sales guys all the time, if they ask, why should I buy a unit from you? Our answer is, I don't know that you should. Tell me what you're doing and we'll see, because there's a lot of instances that we know it's not going to work. And, we're better off telling you that, hey, that's cool, man, but I don't think we're in on that.
Yeah.
I don't think we can help you with that. And that's better than an upset customer.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, because I think you mentioned like the 80-20, right? So I think of the 80% and how many people depend on their trucks for their livelihood. And it's just, in my experience, it's always been, it's like an emergency situation. The truck doesn't move, it doesn't drive, you need it to make money. And now you're trying to do that research. Like we talked about watches a bit. I've already read about them, watched videos, gone on the manufacturer website. I know all the details of it. I don't have that luxury if my work truck goes down. And I think it's really helpful what you mentioned to look for when you're calling around or searching online of what's gonna fit my needs.
Yeah. And the person on the other end of the phone should be asking you what your needs are. There should be an affirmation of needs.
There's something said about selling product versus selling somebody a solution to their problem. And that's something that I tried personally. Is I'm wanting to go and give you a solution that you're going to be happy with.
Nobody wants a customer with buyer's remorse. It's not good.
Yeah. Well, I'd mentioned to you guys before the podcast that one of the big questions and curiosity that I get from listeners is about these 10 speeds. And I think part of it is because some of them are going to be coming out of warranty soon or already have, and people are looking to the future and what can they do with them. And we're never going to go back to 4-speed transmissions or 3 speeds with an overdrive. It's just going to be, keep on this progression route of more gears, more software, all that kind of stuff. Specifically, like to the Ford and GM, what do you guys think of those transmissions? Are they stout? Are you guys hopeful for the future and different build options for them? Do you like them? Do you like driving those trucks? What do you think?
Yeah, I drive an Escalade with a 10L. Just put a 4,000 stall in it, and you can drive this vehicle around all day under 2,000 RPMs. I don't care for the factory programming, the shift algorithm. They stack the shifts. But as far as beating on it, this is a stock Escalade that we did some headers and some gears on it, and a tune and a couple of other little small things. But a beat on it for about 135. And when I say beat on it, we're talking. I mean, I've been all over the U.S. in this thing, and 135,000 miles. Is what and it never actually really went out. It was just at the point where we had beat on it for so long. We're starting to get some long shifts that we were recording. And, it was one of those things, hey, let's take it out and go ahead, and I'm ready to put a converter in and do some other stuff, do some upgrades. But whether it's the Ford or GM and gas or diesel, they're great units. I want you to think about something, Patrick. If you had a 69 Camaro that had 500 horsepower with 410 gears, right? And you had turbo 400 in it, and you drove it around town, that vehicle would feel really good to you, probably, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Burnouts all day long. So if you take 410 gears and a turbo 400, and first gear on the 400 is 248 to 1, right? You take 248 and you add 410 for the rear gear, that's 658 to 1 torque multiplication before we ever get to torque multiplication of the converter, right? 410 plus 2.48. That's the first gear on a 400. If you go to a 10-speed, first gear is 471. So first gear is 471. And if I put, say, a 308 rear gear, now I'm 771 to 1 torque multiplication. Or in the instance of this Escalade, we put 373 gears in it. And so, now we're well over 8 to 1 first gear torque multiplication before we get to the torque multiplication of the converter. Now, what that allows you to have is some pretty nasty launches, right? The other great thing about it is, let's say you're a diesel guy and you want to put a really big peaky turbo with a non-divided AR because you're just a dyno queen. And that's all you want is that number, right? It allows you to put a large turbo that once you get it spooled, my shift recovery is only about 1,000 to 1,200 RPMs. So you're there at a fat part of the horsepower and torque curve. You don't have to worry about shift recovery. So your average weighted horsepower and torque, if you're looking at average weighted, whether it's gas or diesel, your average weighted horsepower and torque is going to be greater than what it would be on a 6-speed, if that makes sense to you, because of shift recovery, where we can be at a peakier part of the horsepower and torque curve. As far as longevity, I think we haven't really seen the limits on the Allison and Ford yet, have we, Montana?
No, with them only being out from 2020, I do get cores that have 400, 500,000 miles on it. I think so often we get in a pattern where we just go and talk about everything wrong with the 10-speed. Let's talk about what they did right for a second.
Yeah.
When it comes down to hard part breakages, back to turbo 400s, 48s, we had shafts, we had cases, we had all sorts of issues. 10-speed, they're pretty robust units.
Ford didn't have shaft. I haven't seen a shaft.
No, shaft failures, planetary failures, case failures. That side of things are out the window. We have cars that you take a 10R80 for a Mustang or 10L that was rated for 400 horsepower. We're pushing that to 15, and in some extreme cases, 1,700 horsepower, deep 7-second. And we're not finding breakages like that. I think as a whole, the ones that I have gotten in here with 400,000 miles on it, it was the expected wear. Back to what Blake said, it's the same exact pattern of wear that we saw on the 1,000, 1,200 horse vehicles. It just took a much longer time to get there. But I don't think that this unit, number one, it's not going anywhere. We're stuck with it. Yep. Let's make the best out of it. But I think they did a lot of things right with theory of operation as well as the duty that the planetaries are able to handle. Those are the things they've done right. We know they could have made some better choices on clutches and some material changes, but that's why we're here.
If you look at the VIO data, Patrick, it's going to be 28 million by 2028. And what that looks like, and that was the reason that we bought 8 10-speed cars. And we went to F450, we got the Denali, we've got the Camaro, the Mustang, the Roush truck, the Ford Explorer ST, the Escalade, and the Camaro. Those are all that we bought strictly for the 10-speed platform to do the R&D, and then we got a couple of 8 HP vehicles as well, because we're getting heavily in that. But what they'll tell you is, Board will tell you, they sold the Water Valley, Mississippi plant, and they sold it back in 2019, and that thing produced $200 million a year in revenue. Now, why would Borg Warner sell that? Because they took that money and they invested it in CellLink, which is a company, if you can go look on their shareholders, but it's a company that does heavy electrical grids. So if I have a battery here and a motor here, it creates electrical grid to transfer high voltage without RF interference or anything of that nature, shielded cables and whatnot. So, you look at Borg, it's going to be electric assist, but there will be 28 million 10 speeds by 2028. I think the bio data is that maybe there's 4 million 68 RFEs on the road today. Yeah, so it'll be 11 million GMs and there'll be 17 million Fords by the year 2028. We also know that unit, and talking to Borg and some of the engineers, that unit is capable of 16 speeds with programming. They're overdriving and underdriving in that set with the way the planets are set up. So they could have as many as 16 speeds if they wanted to. I don't think there'll ever be a need to, but it's here to stay. The one thing that probably will change that we're going to see is going to be electric assist on takeoff. Our electric technology. GM had the E-Ray that had 250 horsepower electric motors in the front, had a 500 horsepower motor in the back. The Corvette, we're seeing some of the Dodge stuff with electric assist takeoff now. So that's probably where it's going to go. And that could be, Patrick, if you want to talk about the future of fun, there's nobody that can tell you can't discharge your batteries at a greater rate. So if we're talking about electrification, if I came to you and I said, hey, your vehicle's got a 200-mile range, right? We bought a Lightning as well, an electric Lightning. And say that at Lightning, it has a 300-mile range. Well, say I drive 5 miles to work back and forth, and I plug it in every night. Well, if I told you, Patrick, I can give you 60% more power with 50% less battery life, so you can only go 150, but I can give you another 600 foot-pounds of torque through the electric motors to the discharge rate. Degradate your batteries a little bit greater. Would you care?
Not if I was driving only 5 miles to work.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think with the electric assist, there's going to be some neat stuff. We talked to the engineers at Ford and NHRA a couple of years ago that had that electric Ford Copo that they had, and so we talked about the capacitor discharge and different discharge rates, and their biggest issue, they had to stick a 400 in it with a converter because of wheel hop. They couldn't bring the power on linear enough. They had to have a hydraulic dampener, and that's what the converter was for. But anyways, we digressed.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting to have this conversation with you guys and the focus that you have on the future, because this is just historically my perception, is the transmission stuff lagged behind some of the other advancements with diesel trucks, tuning, turbos, some of the other stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was always trying to play catch up. This is really the first time that I'm hearing and learning that you guys are evolving at the same time as these transmissions are hitting the market and looking into the future of how they're going to be. So I think it's very unique in this space to hear this perspective versus to contrast it with like what we talked about earlier. I don't like my 68 RFE. I'm going to throw in a 48 RE that came on, an 03 to 07 or something like that. It's entirely different. As far as the performance side, the 20% side, do you guys think that specifically, like with the Ford and the GM trucks, that those 10 speeds are going to have the capability to be able to hold some good power numbers for those people that are looking to do those kind of builds?
That's going to depend on your calibrator, but we've had success.
I've got there's so many when it does come to the 20%. There's so many gear ratio options out there. You can make that 10-speed start off in whatever gear you want. So you factor in, okay, depending on the track, I really think that will be in the future a takeoff for us, depending on how poor the track is, even sled pulling. You have options, flash a different file in it that starts off in maybe third gear. The unit itself, I personally have some things out there that are right at the 1,000 wheel horsepower mark. They're dialing in the tuning, and we're seeing some really amazing shift times when it comes to that in comparison to what we normally would see with the traditional Allison or even a 68 at a 700 horsepower range. These larger 10 speeds are having some phenomenal shift times at that power level.
That's exciting. I think for the drivability standpoint, for daily driving, towing, the RPM range, how aggressive the acceleration could be from a stop, but then also looking towards the future. And I'm a gearhead, and I like to see different advancements with power and torque and tuning, knowing that the platform could have that ability to also support those kind of power levels is exciting too.
Yeah, I think something else that's exciting is the torque converters.
We haven't even got started talking about that yet.
Yeah. But that's a different deal. So we won't even. But it's there's a lot of good stuff. So.
I'm sure that there's going to be people listening to this that they might have one of those older trucks with a 4-speed, or they might have a 5R transmission or 6R 140, or maybe they are just getting into this 10-speed stuff. And they're going to want to ask you guys specific questions, whether it's about a build, a part, a component. What is the best way to connect with you guys and ask those questions, talk about their build, and if they need a transmission, rebuild kit, something like that, to be able to get one headed their way?
Yeah, absolutely. They can find us. Number one is www.suncoastperformance.com. Another way is to call in. Blake, what is our main line number?
850-864-2361.
That's right. Beautiful voice. And then also general questions, they can reach me direct, Montana at suncoastconverters.com. Or if they just have a general, hey, let me get a hold of somebody, info at suncoastconverters.com.
And Patrick, I'm on the road quite a bit. I've been gone for the past 2 weeks, and I think that's what delayed our podcast, was waiting for me to come back. So they can always email me, Blake at suncoastconverters.com. Most of the stuff, though, Montana is still over our R&D, and he still does a lot of technical stuff for us as well. Most of that stuff will probably be better directed at him.
One of the things that I always remembered about Suncoast as a company was seeing the company at events all over the country. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's a really cool way for people to be able to connect. And there's a lot of great events out there. Where are you guys going to be this year? Are you going to be, some of the bigger diesel events out there? Maybe a shop owner's listening, and maybe they want to connect with you guys from that perspective. What's your guys' schedule look like for this summer?
You're about to be at UCC, aren't you?
I will be at UCC. After that, we're going to split this up. We're trying to do some gas campaigns as well as diesel. I'll be around to some of the ODSS races, as well as some of the street car takeover events.
Big SEMA and PRI.
Yeah, and guys, the best way to keep in touch, if you want to go and know where we're going to be at next, pay attention to our social media. We always do a couple-day heads up. Hey, catch us over here at Rudy's Perform, whatever the event is. We do a little heads up there, but we will be around this year, more so than what we were even able to be last year. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, it's hard because Montana's actually partially in sales, partially in tech. He does R&D. We're only about 50 employees here, so everybody wears a lot of hats, as they do with small companies, right? Smaller companies.
It was really cool to chat with you guys today. I appreciate the insights. We touched on a lot of great things, and I know that there's a lot of other topics and questions. We got the Ram 8-speed. We have specific builds, specific different options, questions people are going to have. I'm sure with the 10-speed stuff and other platforms. So I look forward to chatting with you guys again in the future. But today was really cool, and I got to learn some things that I didn't know, how you guys approach building transmissions, how you guys approach the R&D on them. and creating viable solutions to be able to have them hold power. So it was really cool to chat with you today, Blake. Montana, look forward to doing it again. Seeing you guys out there, UCC, different places. So it's a great chatting with you guys today.
Thank you. One more thing we wanted to add: if there's a shop out there, a lot of times people are intimidated or they're scared. What we've done, and they've called me crazy for it the past few years, and ever since we had our research labs, is if you have something and you want to learn, we offer it free of charge. You can come down here, you can build, you can work with us. We can show you a good software file, a bad software file. We can take you for a ride in a vehicle and show you what a shitty file looks like and let you fill it. And then we'll let you look at the log and show you, hey, do you see what this looks like? Okay, well, let's go change it. And this is how we fix it. And then we fix it. Then we go back out there and then we let you fill that. And then we let you look at the log again to see what a good shift feels like or what a good file looks like. That's whatever it is that you're looking to do. If you truly have an interest and you're passionate and you're wanting to come down here, you want to learn, we're in Destin, Florida. It's gorgeous this time of year. Just make sure we're going to be here and they can get in touch with us and arrange that as well.
That's really cool. So they can just email either one of you guys and set something up when you guys have availability. That's awesome. You guys do that.
Yeah, it's kind of we usually feel like after they leave the facility, we have a customer for life. So.
Very cool, guys. Well, again, I appreciate your time today. Great chatting with you. I look forward to doing it again.
Yes, sir.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code TDP2540. It'll get you 40% off MSRP. It's a great way to save some money and get some cool gear if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different opening mechanisms, handle designs. And their whole lineup's designed to meet any budget that you might have. So if you're in the market, make sure and head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com and use code TDP2540 for 40% off MSRP. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters, Tyler Lowe and the 23 Diesel, Cutter Up Rob, Robert, all of other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps. Follow us on social media. We appreciate all your support here in year 9 of the Diesel Podcast and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2025. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.